FM, Bahamas.
Maritime Matters is brought to you live by Bahamas Maritime Connection.
What is maritime?
Maritime, simply put, relates to navigation or commerce on the high seas.
Some say money makes the world go round. I say ships move the money that make the world move.
Who navigates those large international ships?
How often are international ships required to be surveyed and inspected?
Maritime also protects our seas and waters by way of our local Bahamas Defense
It is
Force.
very sad to say that out of 1,500 plus ships that are registered under the Bahamian flag, only a very small amount of Bahamians are employed.
Maritime Matters.
And pleasant good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Maritime Matters. Whether you're listening via radio wave on 97.5 FM, via the internet, radio app, TuneIn or some other radio app, via Cable Bahamas, channel 951, or via BTC Flow TV, channel 606. We appreciate you and we humbly welcome you to our show. We invite and encourage you to check out our YouTube page, Maritime Matters Bahamas. Here you can listen to all our previous shows at your own leisure. Again, pleasant good evening. I am Captain Glenn Bain. It's our 40th Maritime Matters show, people. Tonight, we will delve into discussions on ships, inspections, and surveys. What are the different forms of inspection that those large international ships have to face? Who are the entities that actually conduct these inspections and surveys? How do you become a ship inspector? How long does an inspection of a large international ship take? What about non-international local vessels? Are they required to be inspected and surveyed also? What about safety audits and security audits on board ships? You're in for an informative and revealing one tonight, people. So please, don't you dare touch that dial. Our sponsors for tonight's show, 1-on-1 Pharmacy. Big dogs in the house. You know the deal on them. My good cousin Shatia Hill McBride. Yeah, they had their hands full last week. Got over it. They got over that hurdle like they get over all hurdles. Hey, pharmacists, come on, man. They can get it done. So whenever you're passing 1-on-1 Pharmacy on East Street or Charles Sanders Highway, man, look here. You only need a chocolate, stop and get that chocolate. You need a potato chip, stop and get a potato chip. Boy, but if you need pharmaceutical products, that's the place to be. Once you walk in there, they're going to treat you with royalty. Because why? Because they love people. They're something like me. Let's love them all. Whenever you go into this, let them know Maritime Matters sent you, Captain Glenn Bain, and they can treat you extra special. We also sponsored by Bahamas Maritime Connection. At BMC, we proudly provide you a full slate of ISPS security services. And you know the deal on that. Anybody into ISPS, they know we do all the training, we do all the consultancy, all the audits and assessments and plans and you name it. Once it's ISPS, we got you. To the listening audience out there, it would be remiss of me to go any further and not introduce my big-time, wonderful producer. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce to you the insatiable, the man of the hour, the man with all the power. King on the wheels of steels, I tell you. He is fully able, quite capable. The one and only, Craig Gibson. Come on, give Craig a rousing round of applause out there. I want to hear it from in the studio out here. You're listening to Maritime Matters, people. On this show, we talk maritime. Maritime Matters airs weekly at 19:30, that's 7:30 p.m. every Tuesday here on Love 97 FM. The primary purpose of this show is to highlight persons that made significant contributions to the maritime in the Bahamas and to sensitize Bahamians of opportunities in the maritime sector. Tonight, our opportunities could be in ship inspections and surveys, boat inspections and surveys. We're going to talk about all of this work that we Bahamians could get involved with. That's what we can deal with today. Of course, halfway through the show, we will open the phone lines. The number to reach me or reach us in studio. Oh, only me one in here tonight. My goodness. Hey, somebody come join me, man. Okay, the number to reach, 326-8255. I say again, the number to reach, and the lines will be open soon as we discuss these ship inspections and ship surveys. The number will be 326-8255. Again, we're going to highlight some of our standing maritime heroes. Well, it was standing. They're laying down relaxing now. May all their souls rest in peace. And before I talk about the champion skipper of the HMBS Flamingo, senior commander in his role, I just want to mention, all the other crew that was on that HMBS Flamingo when they got attacked by the Cuban MiGs. Because every single one of them did what they had to do. They live with that legacy on them. And I say to them, live on, my brothers. We've lost quite a few, as we know. We've lost quite a few. But before we lost the others, please, anytime you see them, just hold them up. Shake their hands. Say to them, you did it. Sorry that you had to go through this. And the country still owe them reparations. We talked about our reparations months ago. This good 50th anniversary year coming around, we want to make sure the only 19 people that ever live in this country that came under attack from a foreign entity with armed force might. The only 19. Nobody else in this world or no other Bahamian ever could say that they came under the attack of an Air Force MiG while they were doing their duties for the Bahamas. So we gotta make sure those guys are paid for what they went through because they didn't train for that. Anyway, that's another show. Second in line is Port Controller Extraordinaire. Hey, and it's another Exomian. Well, of course, Commander Amos role, Senior Commander Amos role was is it Roll Town? I think it's a Roll Town, man. Was it Roll? I think it's Roll Town. Senior Commander Amos role. And then you got Mr. Leon Flowers, another Exomian, who was the port controller, the best port controller ever. And I say that without hesitation. Because what that man did, port controller could begin to say they did, right? He brought the Bahamas on the map with cruise ships, and he went all over the world preaching how good our waters and our ports are. Third on our list, we got the great, the legendary one himself, another Exomian, sloop sailing pioneer, the legendary Captain Raleigh Gray. And he deserves more than kudos. Anybody knows anything about sailing? Oh yeah, even if you don't know about sailing, you can know about the great Raleigh Gray. Then we got our only Olympians in a maritime event. Gold medalists, Sir Derwin Knowles and Cecil Cook. They brought home the bacon the first time a Bahamian ever stood on a podium in an Olympic stadium with a gold medal coming to them. So we can never forget what they did for our country, eh? Now, what we got going on locally in this country, we all know what's happening right now, eh? Hurricane Nicole. No, she ain't a hurricane yet. Boy, but it's all projected and anticipated that when she reach Abaco tonight, she will be hurling hurricane intensity category 1. That's over 70 miles per hour. So she will be hurricane status as she lay on top of Abaco tonight. Of course, she moves along onto Grand Bahama tomorrow, and she's supposed to sustain or maintain that strength 1, that category 1. And then she'll go the whole length of Grand Bahama, as you know, some of these hurricanes do. Dorian didn't. Dorian stopped halfway and then went north. This one is going to go all the way, keep going west, all the way to Florida, holding on to that strength 1. We hope she don't go to anything higher than strength 1. In fact, we hope she be lower than strength 1. Go back to a thunderstorm or whatever you was before you could turn into the hurricane thing, eh? Okay, so that's Nicole. Now a thunderstorm about to become a hurricane sometime tonight as she move into Abaco. This is Mother Nature at work, people. Anything goes. Yes, we got good projections. We got good weather reporters. And they're giving us all the projections, all the possibilities that they can see. And usually they come very close to being right on point. So we're going to take what they say. They're saying to us, it's going to be a Category 1 hurricane. And you know these days people be like, oh, that's only Category 1. We ain't got to worry about that. Let me tell you something. In times gone by, the only thing we used to know is Hurricane 1 and 2. And the last show they used to put out, you don't want to know. You don't take any hurricane for granted. So take all necessary precautions. Take nothing for granted until that storm is past and clear and look like it ain't coming back. Then you can start saying, boy, that one gone. And if you get caught in the eye, don't get fooled. So you know the eye is calm. But when the tail come after the eye, you will get lashed if you don't be careful. So don't take anything for granted. When you get in the eye, don't think that this is storm finished because it's the rough part, the tail end coming at you. So people, take all precaution. We don't want to lose anybody. We don't want anybody to have no major disaster as a result of not being careless. So take all precautions and don't do anything silly. Thank you very much. We are talking maritime, people. You are listening to Maritime Matters. At this point, we move to our first break. When we return, we will engage tonight's maritime discussion. Listen, people, don't touch that dial. This one is going to be cozy. Thank you very much.
At Bahamas Maritime Connection Limited, we offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection. At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Sanders Highway location. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. You are listening to Maritime Matters. You're going to be live. Just make that call, 326-8255. The lines are going to now open for you as we engage tonight's discussion on ships inspection and service. We got over 50,000 ships out there, people, that are internationally registered. We're not talking about 100,000 yachts and so many thousand go-fast boats and fishing boats. And we're just talking about big international ships that carry either cargo or passengers to make money. Over 50,000 of them. And all of them have to be inspected a couple times every year. What are the different form of inspections that those large international ships have to face? The first one I will call is the one that happens more often than the others, especially if you're driving a shabby ship, because everybody want to inspect you because they want to find problems with you so that they can detain your ship. We ain't talking about detention this time. We're just talking about inspections and surveys. We'll talk about detention another time and how a detention impacts a flag registry. So we got port state inspections. That's when you are a ship captain, whether it be a cruise ship, a tanker, a container ship, whatever kind of ship you are the captain of in your crew, you go into port to do some trade. Either you're taking on cargo, or I'm letting off cargo, because that's what ships do, or passengers. You're taking on passengers or you're letting off passengers. And in most cases, you take on passengers once until the trip finish. But whenever they go to those stops, they're going to be going ashore and coming back, so you're still engaging, right? And when that ship ties up to that facility, you know what happens? Somebody shows up, like I used to do, and say to the men that are controlling the access to that ship, look, I am the port state inspector for my country. I am here to carry out and to conduct an inspection of the ship. And guess what? No matter what's going on, they cannot turn me away. So those inspections are impromptu. They are unannounced. And of course, they don't like it because ships are very busy things. Sometimes they get in port. The captain was up all night making sure, the ship didn't get into any problems because there may be an emergency happen. But the captain gets up out of his cabin. They wake him up. Why would they wake up the captain? Because a little fella like me come to inspect a cruise ship or a tanker or a container ship. I'll tell you why. Because if that inspection goes on and I come across some things that the crew can't explain, but the captain would understand a little more about it, that captain can cause that ship to not be detained. And if a ship is detained and it's found that the captain was sleeping while inspection was going on, well, his career finished. Because ain't nobody want no captain who could be sleeping through an inspection that caused the ship to be detained. That could, they want to know the captain is on top of his game, eh? So the port state inspection is the inspection where no matter where a ship goes in the world, somebody from that country who was authorized and trained to be what they call a port state inspector. In other words, they go to the port and inspect any ship. Well, of course, you will look at the details. Sometimes you just go there nilly-willy and don't even check to see what ships can be there. You just go and you look at the ships. So the port state inspection is the one that happened more often than the others on board ship. Now, what are the others? They have something they call flag state inspection. What is a flag state inspection? A flag state inspection is an inspection by people of the country that flagged the ship. What you mean by flag the ship, Mr. Bain? Flagging a ship means that your country registers that ship. The ship is not owned by Bahamians, or in the case of the Bahamas, it's not owned by somebody from that country. It's owned by somebody anywhere. Anybody who owns a ship and want to register it under your country, they make application to register their ship. And countries like to register ships. Why? Because it gives them bragging rights. Oh, we have so many 100 ships under our flag. And in addition to that, every ship is money. When you register your ship under a country flag, you have to pay what they call annual fees. And for a regular ship, that annual fees will be about $5,000-$6,000 a year. I'm talking about the little ones, right? When you start getting into the bigger ones, you're looking anywhere between $20,000 to $25,000 a year, just as an annual fee for being on the register. Not talking about the other fees they got to pay for certain licenses and for certain inspections and that type of thing, because they got to pay for them too, right? So the port state inspector, the flag state inspector, is somebody that works for the administration of the country that registered the ship. And even if they don't work for that administration, they are authorized by that administration to be able to go on one of that country's ships. You see how ships work? Ships are something like embassies. Most of us would know that the American embassy, situated in Japan is off limits to the Japanese government or any other. When you have an embassy, that property where that building is on represents your country. And your country law applies in that embassy. It's the same thing with these ships. Excuse me. These ships represent, let's say we have one of our Bahamian ships in Germany. That ship is tied up alongside the dock. Once you step on board that ship, once you leave the dock and you cross that gangway and you come on board that ship, you're no longer in Germany as far as the law is concerned. Because anything happens on that ship while you're inside that ship, the Bahamas law will have to deal with that in a court somewhere, but they can't. German law wouldn't apply within that ship. That ship is the property of the laws of this country, right? The government don't own the ship. The ship owner still owns the ship. But he got to adhere to all the laws that apply to ships based on our registry. He's flying the flag of the Bahamas, and he has to if he wants to be on our register. The name Nassau have to be written on the stern of that ship. Not if he want to, but he have to. Because the ship is identified by the country that registered it. And what happened? That country is responsible for the performance of that ship where it comes to international law. What are international laws pertaining to ships? IMO conventions. IMO is the International Maritime Organization. I don't want to get too technical. I'm just trying to keep it on even keel to let y'all know how all is tied together, right? The IMO has over 170 countries worldwide that make up the IMO. It comes under the United Nations, like all the other United Nations ambits, right? International Labour Organization. The big one is World Health Organization, or the WHO, when dealing with the pandemic and all that. So IMO is just another one of those ambits of the United Nations, right? But IMO is responsible for these 50,000 plus ships that are registered to do international trade, whether you're trading passengers or cargo. You have to register with one of those IMO countries. You choose which one. Got 170 something of them. Choose which one. And whichever one you register with, that country is now responsible to ensure that your ship remain in full compliance with all the IMO regulations. We call them conventions, right? And they have conventions, and from the conventions, they have various codes. They send out circulars. They send out memorandums, all kind of things they'll send to you. But what the IMO does is they work through each country. The IMO don't do anything with those ships, They don't touch them. They don't inspect them. They don't go near them. They don't give them certification. The IMO leaves it up to each country to manage the safety standards on board the ship they register, to manage the pollution prevention measures on those ships, because those ships on the ocean sailing all the time. They got to flush toilets, right? They got solid waste garbage. They got a ditch. They got people on board. What you don't want get injured, and that's why the ships got to be built a certain way, and systems got to be in place for these ships to, first of all, be safe enough for the people who got to do duties on board to not have any altercation in carrying out their duties. And second of all, to ensure that the ship itself does not sink. Because if that ship sinks, everything from inside that ship goes into the sea. All the fuel that the ship is running, all the cargo, whether it's some chemical stuff, whatever kind of cargo, all the oil from the engine room and the grease and all that stuff getting up in the water, and that ain't good for fish. That ain't good for reef. That ain't good for the ocean, right? So the first thing the IMO don't want to happen is they don't want the ship to sink. And that's why they focus so hard on the crew being certified for whatever they do on board a ship. Anyway, I'm getting away from inspections. So we're talking about port state inspection. Port state inspection happens by an officer from that country where that port is. Usually from that administration where that port. Now in the U.S. Coast Guard are port state inspectors, right? They use their Coast Guard to do all of their port state inspections, which mean they appear on ships, do the inspection. Sometimes 3 or 4 of them show up. Sometimes 1 or 2 may show up. But they come, they do the inspection unannounced. And, of course, they're quick to detain if something wrong, right? We know Coast Guard don't play. Well, here in the Bahamas, we got an inspector as well, right? I used to do it at some stage. But my opinion is we need more than one. We need like at least about a crew of 10 of them that you could start to train, move around, do things if we're serious. But we ain't serious, right? So, we port state inspectors go to the ship unannounced. Flag state inspectors, they are not necessarily persons from that country who work for the government of that country or for the administration of that country. It could be a private surveyor or private inspector that has some history of inspections and they properly certified to be an inspector. And they could live anywhere in the world. The Bahamas Maritime Authority, which is our flag administration, they manage or they're responsible for over 1,500 ships that carry the Bahamas flag. Over 1,500. This ain't no small business we're dealing with here. That's big time, right? And for those 1,500 ships, we have over 70. It used to be about 170 when I was with the BMA. So I assume it's probably around 200 now, right? Scattered all over the world. Inspectors. And these are people that the Bahamas Maritime Authority contracted to say, we are giving you the authority to inspect any Bahamian ship that require inspection. And they all require inspection at least once a year, all 1,500 plus of them, right? So they're basically giving you the rights to get a job on Bahamian ships because somebody got to do the annual inspections on these ships. And that comes under what you call flag state regime. The flag state provides inspectors. They scattered all over the world. So wherever your ship is, all you got to do is go on the website for Bahamas Maritime Authority and you can find who's the inspector for that region or that area. Or you can call an inspector that you're familiar with from somewhere. Once they are authorized, they call them ANIs, Authorized Nautical Inspectors for Bahamas Maritime Authority. Once they are authorized to do that inspection, you can have that inspection done. Because you have to do it at least once a year within 3 months of your ship's anniversary when they join the flag. That's like your birthday. The day they joined the Bahamas flag and they were carrying the Bahamas flag and they were registered is their anniversary date. So every year when that date comes, they got within 3 months, either before or after, to get that annual inspection done. And if they don't do that annual inspection, you know what happens? The BMA has the authority to send one of the inspectors, because you can always track these ships and find out where they are. In fact, they all have ship managers that are registered with the BMA as well, because they got to make sure the ship maintains its compliance, right? But all of these international conventions and whatnot that the IMO put out, and all the instructions that are put out by the BMA, they put out extra instructions to ships that they register. Because if I'm going to register you, you're going to carry my flag, you have the rights to trade worldwide, I got to keep some tabs on you, eh? So I can give you all kind of things to do. So the flag state inspector from anywhere in the world, and like I say, it's almost 200 of them, you can choose whichever one you want to come on your ship, and you have to get your ship inspected at least once a year. And when they come on there to inspect that ship, that ain't no little jokey business. Because they got like a 20-page document they're using to make sure they ain't leaving nothing out. It's called an assessment tool. They got that tool, and they turn in page after page, checking this, checking that, and they have to complete every box on that 20-plus page document before they could say the inspection is completed. Part of that inspection, they have to make you do a safety drill. Maybe firefighting, maybe man overboard, something to do with safety on board the ship. You got to watch them do a drill, right? You got to, we could talk some details about this flag state inspection shortly, right? But let's just go down the list of inspections. I ain't get no call yet, so I guess y'all either liking this, y'all getting bored, or y'all just taking it and say, boy, keep talking, I learn it, right? Okay, so I'll keep talking. We got the port state inspections. Those are the people who come on unannounced. Wherever the ship go in the world, somebody from that country comes on board and inspect it. Get the flag state inspections. Those are the ones where the authorized inspector that the country that registered your ship has to come on at least once a year within 3 months of your anniversary date. All right? We got dry dock inspections. Now, what is dry dock inspections? You know those ships, every ship you see out, they got to come out of the water at least once every 5 years. It used to be twice in every 5-year period. But now they do the midterm one, the middle one. They say, okay, well, this is a medium dry docking period. We'll do in lieu of dry dock and have divers go down and have a look at the hull and see that everything is all right. And then that's acceptable. So, but the second one, every 5 years, you got to come out of the water. And this is part of the reason why places like Grand Bahamas Shipyard and Bradford Marine, they can't lose. Because if you got over 50,000 ships out there, and each one of them got a dry dock at least once every 5 years. And when they come to dry dock, they ain't coming just for one day. They're coming for like a week. In some cases, 3-4 weeks. In some cases, 3-4 months. According to the age of the ship and what all have to be done. Because we ain't get surveys yet to tell you what happens when they dry dock, right? But a dry dock inspection have to be done they have to actually come out of the water and go on the dry dock. And our survey report have to be written with all the details of what happened on a dry dock. As a matter of fact, before that dry dock, they are told what all they have to do when they take the ship out of the water. How much shaft they got to pull, whether they got to pull the rudders, all the bearing clearances. It's so much that got to be done. Sounding of the hull. And my good friend, Captain Herbie Bain, would have alluded to some of this with yachts the other day. But all of those ships got to go through these things. This ain't nothing fancy or unfancy, just something, but they don't have a choice. You have to do it. And dry docking ain't cheap. Anytime a boat go on dry dock, they're looking at well over $100,000. So when you hear our local boats, right? And we got plenty of them, male boats, they ain't know when last they been on dry dock. Because every time they go on dry dock, that's when $300,000 to $400,000 they got to spend just to go on dry dock. Just to get your ship up there, to get it clean and painted, and to get your bearings checked. And if you need to change bearings, that's another cost. Yeah, if you need to get your propeller resurfaced and redone, that's another cost. These dry docks are not cheap, but you're required to do it for international ships at least once every 5 years. Now, for passenger ships, cruise ships, because they're carrying people, they say they got to come on the water once every other year. I think they changed that a little bit recently. But when I was doing inspections, that's what, but 15 years ago, those cruise ships had to come out of the water at least once every 2 years. And the next year, they had to do an in lieu. Either they come out of the water every year, or you do an in lieu, then come out. Do an in lieu, then come out. Because that in lieu saved them a lot of money. When they get divers to go down and they take video of the whole hull, all kind of lights, and they check and everything. But that next year, they got to come out of the water. And taking a cruise ship out of the water ain't cheap, as most of you probably know, right? And this is the reason why I'm saying dry docks cannot go wrong. Because ships don't want to come to you. They have to come to you. So the dry dock inspection is another inspection. Eh? That's a different kind of inspection. That ain't an inspection that the port state inspector does or the flag state inspector does, right? They have people who know, who work dry docks, who understand how to sound hulls, and they do that survey report. For these type ships now, you got myself and Herbie and them, we could do dry dock report for non-solar ships, as we call it. In other words, non-international big-time ships. We wouldn't even get that job. Usually the Classification Society does that themselves. And we can talk a little bit more about Classification Society. Surveys. Oh, now we get to the big dog. What is a survey? We talk about inspection. We get port state inspection, flag state inspection, dry dock inspection. And then we got inspection on domestic vessels, where the port department sends some inspectors to check your running lights, check your bilge pump, check your steering wheel. You're checking things to make sure things on this boat working, right? That's a local inspection. But now we got something called surveys, which goes beyond inspection. Surveys of those big, large international ships takes, in some cases, days, right? Sometimes they send 3 and 4 team of surveyors to a big ship, and they live on board for a couple of days before they finish those surveys. Because those surveys have to be done for them to issue you certain certificates to say that this area of your ship We done check everything out, and this is the certificate we giving you, so you're good to go. Now, if something is wrong in that area, but it's not detrimental, it's just wrong and need to be corrected, the surveyor will give you call a condition or memoranda, right? And the entities that survey those large ships are known as classification societies. Class, we call them class for short, right? Classification society. And the classification society, they are really owned by countries, right? In days gone by, I think the first country that probably had a classification society was Great Britain. Because, Britain used to rule the sea back in the day. And their classification society, name most of us familiar with, is Lloyd's Register. You hear somebody say, oh, that ship is classed with Lloyd's Register, or they're insured by Lloyd's, right? The classification society is not the insurance company, right? The classification society is the entity that rummages your ship. They go through every nut and bolt of that ship, and they verify that this ship is now good to keep this certificate for 5 years or however long it is. But of course, you still have to get service on an annual basis, right? So what areas do these surveys focus on? First of all, they can look at your hull, right? And the thing about the hull of a ship, and those who don't know, the hull is that part that sits in the water, right? The superstructure sits on top of the hull. So the ship itself, every piece that touches the water is the hull. The hull holds the ship in the water. Now, the hull of the ship has what you call a plimsoll marking, right? It's a little round circular thing with a line drawn across it. That's known as a plimsoll mark or load line mark. And what that does, wherever you see that on the hull, that should never go underwater. Because it's your line or your mark that says your hull shouldn't go below this before it's a big safety risk or as they say, what you call it, when the stability risk, right? The stability of your ship is now going to be compromised if you sink that load line. And they do a lot of calculations to get that load line on the spot where it is. So when you see a ship and you see a load line, they ain't like, let's pick a spot and say, let's put the load line here. No. They have to do massive amount of calculations. This is exactly where the load line got to go, right? Because like I say, that's a visual test to see that the ship is not overloaded. If that load line is below the water line, the ship is overloaded. You shouldn't allow the ship to sail. So we want to know that when you go to a ship, first of all, when you look at that plimsoll mark or that load line mark, you will see the name of the classification society written along that line. Now the line sometimes comes down and got other branches, but we're talking about the main line that goes across, right? For Lloyd's Register, you will see L on the left-hand side and R on the right-hand side. So before I even go on board a ship, if I don't know the ship, I just go on and hop and I come across the ship as an inspector, a port state inspector, I will say, okay, I go in on the ship. But I walk from stern to bow. Why do I do that? Because when you get on the ship, you can't see the ship forward of the ship or after the ship or even the side of the ship. So I do that before I go on the ship. I will walk to the front of the ship and I would look at the bow, I'd look at the superstructure, I'd look at the life raft, see how they looking from the dock side. Then I walk along and then I check the plimsoll mark. And then I know right off the top, this is Lloyd's Register because I see LR. Or you may see ABS. In America, their classification society is ABS. That's really the American government, eh? LR is like the British government, but of course, they private entities now because they service in the whole world. The whole 50,000 ships out there, they are there to make sure, certify these ships, do the surveys on board to certify them. And they got to be certified before an inspection could be done. And I explain that part, how the survey tie in with the inspection later, right? Well, if you have time tonight, I'm sure we got some time because ain't nobody calling, ain't nobody checking for what I talking about. I get too technical. What are you talking about? I know about all these inspections. Okay, so we can break it down a little bit, right? So the survey, the classification society, you have Lloyd's Register, you have ABS, which is the American Bureau of Shipping, which is really for American ships. If you flag your ship US, you cannot use any classification society other than ABS, right? Whereas if you flag your ship Bahamas, you could use ABS, you could use Lloyd's Register, you could use Det Norske Veritas or DNV, which is out of Holland. You could use BV or Bureau Veritas, which is out of France. You could use Arena, which is out of Italy. You could use NKK out of Korea. You could use any registration, any of those, what you call major classification societies, to actually do the surveys on your ship. Because you have to have a contract with the classification society, and they take care of your ship. You're not going to have two different classification societies for one ship. Once you choose one, you're playing by their rules. And all of them have similar rules, but their rules go beyond what the IMO put out for you to be in compliance with. So you got this, the convention and code and circulars requirements from IMO. You got the class rules, and then you get flag rules, because the flag state also gives you additional things that they want you to make sure you have in place when you register under that flag. So when you own a ship and you run in a ship, that ain't no easy thing. You got so much things coming at you. You're so busy. And most of your busyness come from dealing with surveys, first of all, and then inspections. And this before you start doing the job you're really there for. Excuse me. So this is how you roll when you're on board ship. And these are some of the things you learn when you work on these international ships. And this is why sometimes we say, well, you got to have some international ship exposure as a ship officer before you could be an inspector or surveyor, because you have been exposed to those things when you work on ships. And if you don't work on ships, you're not going to be exposed to them unless, of course, unless you're a ship designer. To say you are a naval architect, you did architecture. The difference between just architecture and naval architecture is the regular architecture deal with buildings that don't move, yeah? Houses and hotels and things on land. The naval architect deals with ships. And these ships ain't built like blocks. These ships are round and flourish and have to be, the thickness of the steel in the bow is thicker than the one on the side and in the back, and where the shaft protrudes from the hull, you got to strengthen that area. And so when you're designing ships, you got to really, really know what you're doing. And that's why the naval architecture can also be an inspector of ships. That's like a building inspector could be an architecture, right? Because if you got to draw a house, he need to know the details of what goes into that house and what the builder got to do. So the naval architecture is another person who could be a ship inspector or even a ship surveyor, right? But the surveyor, like I say, is really the people from those classification societies, Lloyd's Register, ABS, Bureau Veritas, or BV. They're the three main ones. Well, DNV is a main one too. RENA's a main one. They got NK. They got a lot of like 10 of the major ones, right? I can't name them all. I even ain't writing nothing down. I'm talking in my head right now. I'm talking from experience, I should say, not in my head. And the certificates that they would issue based on their survey, like I say, the safety hull certificate, right? The safety hull certificate means you got to dry dock that ship so that the hull could be taken care of at least once every 5 years, right? And when you're doing that safety hull certificate, they check everything underwater, all your propellers, your shaft with holding your propeller, your brackets with holding the shaft to the hull, the bearings where the hull shaft protruding through the hull and making sure no water go back into the ship because the shaft's spinning. Your rudder directs where the ship, how you steer the ship. But your rudder have to go through the hull, right? Because it have machinery moving it at the top, but can't be in the water. So where that go through the hull, again, you got bearings. So those sometimes they make you pull them down out of the bearing so they can check the bearing thoroughly, check the stem, check the rudder itself, make sure they ain't bent up. And if it bent up, that's another cost. So those surveys, the hull survey, go very deep. And then they do soundings on the hull. In other words, they check the thickness in certain areas to make sure the hull thickness is still holding. Then on the inside, you got your vertical zones, the stringers, your bulkheads. They check all that stuff out as a hull survey, right? Because the hull is the strength of your ship. And then you got other certificates, like the safety equipment certificate. And in addition to just having the SOLAS convention or those conventions that you need, you have something called a safety equipment code. That was like the first code they really produced outside of the convention, because they realize when you're dealing with safety equipment, you got to make sure these equipment are not ready to drop off the boat when they hit rough weather. The equipment on board a ship got to be secure, tight, because ships go in the sea and sometimes they get hit rough weather. So your equipment shouldn't fall apart because you have hit rough weather. So they have what they call type approval for certain equipment. And when they say type approval, they got to approve every piece you use to make this equipment, right? And the main equipment we get for safety is what? Lifeboats, right? Life rafts, life jackets, firefighting equipment. Those are things we got as for safety purposes. And we got to install them all around the ship in areas where they could be useful if there is a danger of the ship sinking, a ship collision, or, if something's going on where you got to get off the ship. You got to use those equipment. And when they do a survey on your safety equipment, they go as far as going in your life raft, right? And making you open up on your life raft, because they can check to see when last you had a service. And they want to see that you have the rations in there that's supposed to be there in case your life raft have to be deployed. You have the canister with water. And they do the same thing with your lifeboats. Your lifeboat's supposed to have in it enough food and water to keep those people in there safe for days while they're floating on top of the water if the ship sink. Because they ain't got time to go in the galley of the ship or in the kitchen of the ship and grab food and say, boy, we got in this life raft, we need some food. No. Sometimes you got to go in the life raft, the boat almost under, you got to cut loose and that's that keep you surviving until somebody come to rescue you. So your safety equipment have to be checked. Make sure the water and the food ain't outdated, because when they come with the lifeboat, you got to change them every now and then, right? Although you didn't use them, you got to ditch them and change them, because they are there so that if something go wrong, that's what people got to rely on to live. Enough of safety equipment. Now, a certificate have to be issued once the survey is completed. And those surveys, like I tell you, they have a long list of things that got to be checked on board every ship. And they compare the ship against that list that they have, that the class have. And once they could check off on everything, they will then issue something called an International Ship Safety Certificate. Safety Equipment Certificate, right? To say that your certificate's good to go. And then when the inspector comes on board, he asks to see these certificates. The certificate is good for 5 years, but it have to be endorsed every year again within 3 months of the anniversary date. And the inspector knows that. So these are things, because he know that if class just came on board your ship 3 months ago and they endorse, they sign off on that certificate to say, everything's still up to standard, the inspector ain't need to go behind class and then do another inspection, because that ain't necessary. The job was done. Once class sign off on it, that mean, because they're professionals. They know what they're doing. And it's no need to try and undermine them, eh? Because that's what you're doing if you're going behind them, checking to see if they do what they're supposed to do. And that's it for safety equipment. That's it for safety hull. And then we got something called safety radio. What is safety radio equipment? A certificate for safety radio covers the radios that ship. Now remember, this ship out to sea. This ship ain't got but telco that they connected to. They ain't got BEC that they connected to for power. They don't have call a fire engine because the boat on fire. They got to fight that fire themselves. And all that come under safety, eh? You as a crew got to learn to be your own firefighters. You got to learn to be your own technicians. You got to learn to generate power and keep that power generating throughout the ship. That's why when you're a ship engineer, you do more than just a regular land engineer. Because you basically wearing hats for all those different entities. Electrical, mechanical, fire, warning systems, the ship itself, the engines, the generators. Man, you got so much going on those ships. So safety radio now. Let me get back to that because it ain't look like you all want to call, right? The safety radio deals with, first of all, every one of these international ships are required to carry the VHF radios, right? VHF means very high frequency, meaning it's good for about 35, 40 miles. Any vessel within 35, 40 miles, and you calling them on the high seas, they should be able to respond to you, right? So that's your go-to radio that is on your bridge. Usually you monitor channel 16, and once you monitor that, somebody trying to get you, they will reach you, and then you'll agree to go to another channel, because they have like over 100 channels. They got plenty of channels, right? But they got what they call working channels, which you could select one, and you and that person would then move in and talk whatever you want to talk, because you're not supposed to hold up the contact channel, which is channel 16. And they got other channels for working, like the pilots will have their working channels. Some agents may pick channels they use to deal with their ships that coming into the port, and that type of thing. You got channels for weather reports, and so you got all kind of different channels on the VHF radio. But the thing about those VHF radios, they are now required to be what you call digital select call, right? And I ain't gonna go into too much detail about the DSC. But what the digital select call does is those radios, if another vessel is in your area and they send out a distress on their digital select call radio, that distress will be received on your radio, because your radio will automatically go to channel 70 and pick up that distress. So you can't even stop it from doing that. And the reason why that happens is because you're supposed to be out there ready to render assistance to a ship in distress. That ship may be having a fire on board. They may be had a collision. They could have had sinking because they run aground. It's so much things that could have happened that ship needs you to assist them. And quite technically, you're not supposed to just drive off like you only see the message coming in. Otherwise, you could end up in court. And you got to be. And a lot of cruise ships end up going in court and paying because they saw a fishing boat, they got the message and they ignored it because they figure, I got an itinerary to meet. I can't fool with this fella right now, you know. So that's safety radio for VHF. Now they have the same thing for high frequency radio, because they got radios that are what they call Inmarsat. They deal directly with the satellites and whatnot, and with that you can basically reach. That's how they send emails to their ship managers every day, and you could go online with that to some extent, but you know they ain't really designed for you to surf no internet, the web and stuff like that, and go on YouTube like some of us like to go. Yeah, they're not quite linked like that, but they're very expensive radios, and you can also get a distress call through your Inmarsat system, right? They get something for radios. They call it GMDSS. That's Global Maritime Distress Safety System. That's a belt of satellites around the equator area, straight around the world. And once you bouncing off those satellites, all the ships in that belt area will be receiving whatever message you send out, if it's a distress message. So radios are very important. But before a radio survey could be done, the radios on board your ship would have had to have a radio technician come and he do a technical survey of your radios, where he check the batteries to see that they still good enough to go for another year. He check the impedance. He make sure it's putting out what it's supposed to put out, because your radios could save your life. And you know, for that reason, you got a safety radio certificate to cover radios on board your ship. You need a load line certificate. What is load line? Load line is all the doors and windows and anything that leads to the outside of your vessel. The seal on the door, the glass in the middle of the door, all those things have to be up to load line standard. In other words, the ship going through a storm, water splashing all over the place, shouldn't be able to get beyond those shuttings, right? The clips for your door when you close it shouldn't be stiff. You got to make sure the nipples are greased, and all those things come under load line, right? And like I said, you have a plimsoll mark that gives you the weight of the ship. You can't overload your ship when it comes to load line. They got another certificate called the IOPP, International Oil Pollution Prevention Certificate. What is the IOPP? This is pollution prevention, eh? This is the only certificate that, well, maybe not the only one, but this is the main one that comes from the Maritime Pollution Convention called MARPOL, right? And when you're doing the IOPP, you go on board that ship, the surveyor and the inspector, and you would go in the engine room area and you would check. They got a big machine called an oily water separator, right? Whenever they want to pump their belch, everything got to go through the oily water separator and then go overboard. They got to have science on the oily water separator, say how do you start it and this type of thing. You want to check the oil record book. They got an oil record book showing whenever they move fuel from one tank to the next, they got to record the amount moved, the time it moved. Whenever the vessel burned fuel, they can say how much was burned for a particular day. Whenever they discharge from the waste oil tank to a truck on shore, they got to say when that happened. And these are things that the inspector and the surveyor got to make sure is in order on board these ships. Because you're not supposed to have any oil leave the ship and go in the water. And then, of course, you got certificates for ISM and ISPS. That's another story. We ain't go into no details of that. And while we're getting into... we ain't talk about them certificates. We can come back and talk about who are the entities that actually conduct these inspections. We said it's a classification society, the Port State Inspector, the Port Department does the local ones. And they got independent surveyors that do it for insurances and independent auditors that do the ISM and ISPS audit before the certificate could be signed off by the classification societies. And we're going to go into a little bit of that. So we in for bar night, because ain't none of y'all calling. I don't know if y'all taking in any of this good stuff, but I'm going to keep it going. We're going to keep it going right now. Oh, who are the entities? We're going to move to break in about 5 minutes. Who are the entities that actually conducts these inspections and surveys? I told you that the classification society are the ones that conduct the surveys, right? The inspections are done, and I think we mentioned already, by the port state inspectors, the flag state inspectors, and independent inspectors that do dry dock reports, and of course, the auditors. How do you become a ship inspector? What qualifies you? What qualifies you is your experience as a ship officer on board a ship. That's the first thing. The second thing, your experience as a naval architect designing ships, right? We talk about that too. But the main thing is an engineer on board a ship. Most surveyors are former chief engineers, because those are the ones who understands more how to keep that ship stable from the fluids moving around. You get ballast tanks, you get this kind of tank, the fluids you need on board the ship, the leaks you could have, how to deal with engine maintenance, generator maintenance, air condition systems. Just so much that the engineer does that the regular deck officer wouldn't do, right? Because that regular deck officer, he deals mainly with the cargo on the ship, right? The passengers on the ship. And he also deals with the safety equipment that are put in various parts of the ship. He's really a safety man. But when it comes to pollution prevention and powering that ship and that type of thing, those are the engineers. And they got a big team of them doing it every day. And I can tell you, an engineer on a ship, when he come off that ship and go ashore to be an engineer, he runs circles around some of them people ashore. Because, you know, it kind of burned him now because all the things he was doing on board that ship. So to qualify to be one of those inspectors or one of those surveyors, a surveyor, you need to be an engineer on a ship for quite some time, right? Or, of course, the naval architect who draws designs for ships and that type of thing. They could also be what you call surveyors for classification societies. Small boat surveyors, like yachts and privately owned go-fast boats that, you have big-time insurance. And insurance wants a survey every year. Those ones, you don't need to be an engineer. You can be a deck officer like me. You was a captain, you was a mate, you was an officer to watch, navigation watch. Then you can deal with those type of things, because the main thing with them is really safety. Some of these vessels, they don't be transferring fuel all around the boat. A lot of them wouldn't have an oily water separator where they gotta maintain certain things, and it's not as intricate as the big ships. So we're not engineers, but we could follow common sense engineering stuff when we're doing our survey based on the questionnaire we have, or the assessment tool that we are actually using to do the survey of this small vessel, right? And so that qualify you to be a surveyor on small vessels, which we call non-solus vessels, right? You're not over 500 tons as a cargo ship, and you're not doing international voyages. So they're non-solus ships or vessels. And then you could apprentice with a company. And once you apprentice with them, you obviously picking up the skills to survey and inspect boats and all that type of thing. How long does an inspection of a large international ship take? I told you that the most inspections a ship undergo is the port state inspection. That means whatever port that cruise ship or that tanker or that container ship go to, somebody can just show up and say, I am a port state inspector, I am here to inspect your ship. And a port state inspection normally takes like 3.5 hours. You may ask, 3.5 hours is a long time to be on a ship talking with you inspect it. Why so long? I'll tell you why so long. Because when you go, and I did it many times as a port state inspector. When you go on board the ship, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get together with either the captain or the mate, and you got to go through all the documents on board that ship. You got to go through all of those certificates. GAB, I need your certificates. Let me see a safety equipment certificate. And then you look at the list of equipment. And then you look that there was recently I'm audited and checked. And then you look that class had signed off on the back of the certificate where they say they need to endorse it. Because if the certificate is 2 years old, you want to make sure 2 endorsements are on the back there, yeah? Or if the time still ain't come in, they will tell you, well, okay, we got the surveyors coming on board next month because we still have 3 months left in our window. And then you got to accept that. Yeah, okay, good. But then you would know that the class ain't recently been on board that ship. So some things may start to get a little shabby before class reach and make them fix it. So you know now you probably got to do a little more detailed inspection than normal. And that's why you go through those documents first. And any one of those documents that a port state inspector find invalid, for whatever reason, that is a reason to detain that ship. And for them to get out of that detention, in other words, they can't leave the port, because once you let customs know the ship detained, they're not going to give them out of charge to a custom document to leave the port. And so when they reach the next port, they don't have nothing to show, right? So they wouldn't leave. And you detain that ship until whichever classification society dealing with that ship has to come there and revalidate that certificate. Because class will know why that certificate ran out. Because all of the certificates supposed to be harmonized to be moving together. But now if something go wrong in one of those areas and class give them a limited certificate, when that ran out, they probably needed to do something for class to come back and confirm before they extend the certificate to the regular life. So you call class comes in, and they would deal with it, whatever, and then you could lift the detention once that certificate is good. But the thing is, you're going through all this safety radio certificate, safety health certificate, load line certificate, IOPP certificate, and you going through these certificates. And when you're going through them, you're kind of getting a feel for the ship. Because your IOPP certificate is going to tell you when last they emptied their waste oil tank, right? It's going to tell you whether they have a sewage treatment plant or not. It's going to tell you what capacity they could carry in their fuel tanks. It tells you so much things so that when you get to the oil record book, you know what to look for. And so you're going through those documents, and that usually take you at least 1 to 2, hour to hour and a half, right? Before you can say you don't check every one of those certificates and validate, verify that they're all good to go, and the ship, everything is valid, and they ain't gonna worry about those certificates. And then you start to walk the ship. And what I normally do when I walk the ship, like I tell you, I don't walk the dock. So you walk the dock, check the bow, you walk all along, check the plimsoll mark, and you check in for rust spots. You check in to see if they have barnacles building up on the ship. So you already kind of get an idea that this boat must be in dry dock for a while, or this must be up for dry dock now. Sometimes you go on board and you say, but you guys going to be dry docking soon, eh? And they'll tell you, we'll be dry docking next 3 months. Because the growth already started to build up on the hull. So you walk the hull, check the hull, you go up on the gangway, you check the security of the gangway, right? And that kind of tells you. And then you check the crew. If they got Filipinos, you say, okay, these people are really systematic. They usually work hard. If they got Bahamians, they ain't have no Bahamians, right? Because we might say they might be a little lazy, but they know what they're doing. Anyway, you look at the crew, and based on the type of crew, if they have certain parts of ship like the security are Indians, then you know, well, these people are really matter of fact. They don't play around with it. So you will have an idea already how the ship is being taken care of just by the people you encounter before you even get to look at the certificates. Then you check all the certificates. You document everything you need to document. Because you now, as an inspector, got 1 3-4 page document you got to complete. You ain't just on there for joyride. Because when you finish completing that document, you got to send a copy of that with a cover report to the reporting center in the Caribbean, the CMIC. Well, we ain't getting into all that, right? But the port safety inspection is still going on. Now, you finish the certificate, you start walking the ship. When I get on board, I like to go from the top to the bottom. Top to the bottom means I start with the bridge. What is the bridge? The bridge is the navigation center. That's where all your radar, steering wheel, that's where all your radios, these things up there. So I go up there and I start to check the equipment. I check all of their publications as well. They're supposed to have all of the conventions in a certain area on board that ship. They usually keep it on the bridge, right? They also have for the equipment, all your equipment manuals, right? They sometimes keep that up there. Sometimes the chief engineer will keep it in his area. But you check all the equipment, the radios, you make sure they all on, they all work, and then you ain't got to do no tests on that because you already checked the safety radio certificate and you see that it's valid. But you just getting a general feel, a visual feel, and you stop and you ask questions if you need to. And you keep going from there, right? So that would be the bridge area. When you leave the bridge, you normally say, okay, Cap, because you ain't need to go look in cabins and stuff like that. You go to the galley. Cap, let's go to the galley. What you want to look for in the galley? You're doing a safety and pollution prevention inspection. So safety with everything, and then pollution prevention when you get in the engine room. So you go in the galley. And when you go in the galley, what you looking for? Galley's the kitchen now. You're looking for firefighting arrangements. You want to make sure you have a fire damper over where the exhaust going through. You want to make sure that you have fire extinguishers in certain areas where you got heat. You want to make sure that you may even have a carbon dioxide system, because these ships have what they call carbon dioxide rooms, where they have about anywhere between 100 and 150 canisters, those tall canisters with just carbon dioxide. And they have a button they could press to cause, because they have them connected through pipelines to go to certain parts of the ship. And the galley would have a good handful of those extinguishers connected to go over the areas where they have live fire, flames, and heated parts and that type of thing. So you go to the galley and you're checking out all the arrangement for safety, right? You checking the food to make sure ain't a bunch of rats in the cupboard, and you make sure the crew could always have water. You make sure that the dry food is kept in a dry area and you know, bunch of moisture getting to it and causing it to get grimy and old and that type of thing. So you check in the storage areas. You go in the freezer space and you check in the meat. And that freezer space, you could walk around in those freezers. You know, a little small freezer. Now, you haven't talked about cruise ships, but even the cargo ships, they got big freezers, man. You go in there, you could see that the meaty, old, raggedy meat. And they can even show you when they purchase this meat and all the rest of that. So you check the temperature on the freezer to make sure it's set to the right zone where those meat chips. You go to the perishable area, you check the temperature again, you check their perishables, you make sure they ain't getting the crew no bad stuff to eat, right? And you basically just checking out this galley area. And you go in the dining room area, but of course, they have nice dining rooms, especially the cargo ships. They got a lot of space, a lot of room. And then when you leave the galley, you go on the upper deck. What's on the upper deck? Your life rafts, your lifeboats. And you check them. You make sure your life rafts are properly rigged. Because some of those life rafts are supposed to be rigged to the extent where once that ship starts to sink, they will automatically release themselves. And they will open up as the ship go down. All you see is life rafts popping up around you. And we could have a whole show on that. I could tell you the details of how that's supposed to be rigged. But we ain't got time for that. Not in this show, right? This ain't that kind of show. So you go on the upper deck, you check all the safety equipment, you check the deck itself. You check all the escape areas where people have to escape to get to these lifeboats, the muster stations. And then, okay, so you've done that. You finish with the bridge, you finish with the galley, you finish with the upper deck area, and now you're running into the third hour, eh? Now you got to go to the engine room. You got so much things to check in the engine room because the engineer, the chief engineer himself, he has a whole catalog of stuff that they got to be doing on a timely basis, right? They also got to have the firefighting measure in the engine room because that's always hot. Then you got to have an emergency steering in case something go wrong with your steering, technical stuff. You could go actually to what they call a tiller flat, stand right over where those rudders go down, and manually steer the ship or manually centralize them so that you could steer by main engine or whatever you got to do because you never know when you have a fire that could damage a lot of things, right? But you still have to move that ship because you may be in the middle of the Atlantic. So you have to have an arrangement where you would have your firefighting arrangement in the engine room. You got to go and you got to check all the pipelines because no pipeline should be leading to the hull of that ship so that you could pump things into the sea, except one. And that's the pipeline that comes from your oily water separator. That pipeline can go to the hull and you will note that that pipeline is connected to your oily water separator. And it has to have a valve that you can close shut. And once that valve is shut, that pipe is closed. And you could put a chain and lock around it. And when that ship is in port, they're required to have that locked off. Because they're not supposed to use their oily water separator when they import. Right? Because when you import, you're in an open sea no more. You in a harbor area where you don't need to be pumping anything overboard. So that's how they roll with the IOPP. And when you get in the engine room, you're now dealing with all of these different types of things on board your ship. And you got to do all of this during what? One port state inspection. So when you go on a big tanker, you basically walk in from one end to the next more than once. You walk in because you walk in the deck, you walk in the engine room to the bottom, you go into where the rudders is, you go into where the oily water separators, and all the rest of that good stuff. So you got things covered, right? So you now know that your port state inspection, if it don't take 3.5 hours, you probably leave some things up, right? Then we got the flag state inspection. What is the flag state? That is far more detailed than the port state inspection. And that flag state inspection runs you into 8 to 12 hours. In some cases, 2 days, according to the size ship and the amount of cooperation you're getting. Because you got to also be doing drills and exercises and thing with these people, making sure they know how to outfire, making sure they know how to put a vessel overboard in an emergency situation. So, it's so much you got to do. So what we can do now is we can run to a break, right? We can run to a break, and we're going to come back, and 14 minutes? I don't know how time is go. Where time is going in this room, boy. But they got a time speeder somewhere ticking around here. So when we come back from the break, we will simply move into the crux of how all this ties together. So ladies and gentlemen, I'll give you a break so you can give me a break. Thank you very much.
Maritime Connection Limited. We offer first-class maritime security services throughout the Bahamas and the wider Caribbean. As experts in maritime security, we specialize in production of ISPS assessments and plans, verification audits, certified familiarization training, and port security consultancy, just to name a few. Our services also include provision of a security force to maintain all required ISPS facility security compliance. For all your maritime security needs, visit us today in Nassau at our East Street South location or in Freeport in the Kipling Building. Call us at 392-3515 or follow us on all social media platforms. Bahamas Maritime Connection, your leader in maritime security. Let's help you make the connection. At One-on-One Pharmacy, our friendly staff is ready to serve you. Visit us today for all your prescription and over-the-counter needs at our East Street South or Charles Sanders Highway locations. We're open Monday through Saturday from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. and from 9 to 4 on Sundays. In a rush? Send your refill scripts online at oneononepharmacy.com or ask about our convenient pickup service. One-on-One Pharmacy, providing personal health care with people at heart.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. You are listening to Maritime Matters. We are talking ship inspections and surveys tonight. And boy, we ain't getting no calls. You all ain't into this tonight. But anyway, we're going to complete this. We only got, 10 minutes left? We're going to just rope in our two big dogs, ISM and ISPS audits on board ships. And we can tell you what that is all about. So, we already discussed the different form of inspections for those large international ships. We talk about port state inspections, which means any port a ship go into, somebody could just show up unannounced and say that I'm a port state inspector, I came to inspect your ship. And we said that inspection usually runs you into one good 3 to 4 hours, eh? Because you gotta inspect the ship from top to bottom. First of all, they deal with the documentation. Then you could go on the bridge. Usually, you go from the captain cabin or the what they call it. They have a conference room on some ships, and from there, you go to the upper deck and you deal with the safety equipment, life raft, life jackets, firefighting arrangement, fire hydrants, fire hoses, right? And then when you leave there, you can go to the galley. And in the galley, you check in all them heating arrangement, fire dampers, etc., etc. The carbon dioxide drench system that comes into the galley, you check that out. And you also, while you're in the galley, you check in the food storage areas, the dry food, the frozen food, the perishables. You're checking all of that out to make sure the food is kept in a tidy way that the crew got to eat, right? You leave the galley area, and now you go to the engine room, because the only other areas where crew cabin and that type of thing, you ain't too particular about them, right? So you go to the engine room, you go to the hull, the engine room, down to the bottom, and you check the engines themselves to see if they have any bad leaks and oil draining all over the place, if they're keeping it clean or dirty. And that tells you what kind of engineer you have on board those ships sometimes, right? Is that a line? Line 1? No, it's not blinking. But do you see we get someone on line 1? Oh, okay. So you go in the engine room and by the time you get through with the chief engineer and his team, you're looking at 3 to 4 hours. Of course, you got to get everything signed off, because your document got to be signed off too by the captain and the mate. And then you go and you put your report together, and then you send your report out, and that's how you deal with that port state inspection. Flag state inspections are very similar, except you're going into a lot more details. You're going to look at the crew articles, who hired, where is crew from. Then you can look at all the crew certificates. You can look at something that the flag state issues called a safe manning document, right? What is that safe manning document? That is a piece of paper that says how many people, what's the minimum amount of people you must have on the ship, right? And the safe manning document would usually have one captain, one mate, right? One chief engineer, one second engineer. And then you could have 2 or 3 officers in charge of navigation watch, 2 or 3 engineer in charge of engineering watch, and then engineering ratings, and then you got to have a cook. And so this document tells you what certification each person might have to hold those positions. And the ship have more than just them, of course, but you got to make sure somebody on the ship can fill each one of those positions, and they have the certificate in the certificate file to verify that, right? And of course, you got something called a continuous synopsis record for the ship, where you're checking for anti-terrorism. You want to know who all owned the ship, who all were the people, the classification societies, so from the cradle to the grave, they call it, with these ships. And so much you got to be looking for when you go on board as a flag state inspector as opposed to a port state inspector that the flag requires, right? The country that registered the ship require, in addition to the regular stuff that a port state inspector would be looking for. Because remember now, when you're a port state inspector, you're not going to inspect a ship that's flagged with your country. The whole idea behind the port state inspector is to inspect ships that other countries flagged, to cross-check what they're doing. Because you're supposed to know what's going on with the ships that you flag. You could just call your administration, and you normally are part of the administration anyway, and find out if you want to find out. You ain't got to go on board the ship to find out. But you can't do that with those ships that are not flagged with you. So you go on board and double-check to see that they're okay. And that's how it works. Then we talk about the dry dock inspections. Every 5 years, those ships got to come out of the water. The dry dock survey report got to be done, and all of this in time. And then you check all of your holes in the hull, where the rudder goes through, where the engine shafts go through. You might have a bow thruster up in the bow area. How is that connected? Because, any opening, water could get through and get in your ship and cause it to get off balance. So you got to check all of these things out. And we talk about the difference between a survey and an inspection. The survey is basically to go through all the details of an area and issue certificates to say that your ship is okay. Then the inspector comes behind and he makes sure you have those documents in place. And he does a general look through of your ship to see if anything else. And when he comes across something that is known as a deficiency, inspectors deal with deficiencies, right? Surveyors deal with conditions of class. Auditors deal with what? Non-conformities, major non-conformities, and that type of thing. So observation. So we didn't talk about the auditors, and I left that for last. I don't know how much time I have. 4 minutes? That ain't good. You have to get for your safety management certificate, you have to get an audit done of your safety equipment. And that audit goes in a lot more detail than the inspector or the surveyor would do in dealing with safety, because this is your safety system they're going to be auditing. Your system to do things on board your ship with safety. All of your systems. You should have a manual called that deals with your systems that you have to work by. And this is dealing with quality performance, right? So the auditor actually takes a good 2 to 3 days to do a safety audit of that ship. They start with your certificates, right? And then they go into details of your lifeboat. They go into details of your life raft. They go into details of your firefighting, your fire suits, your anything to do with safety, your man overboard, the way you anchor your ship, anything to do with safety, your stability on board your ship. And that is an audit. And those auditors have a long list of stuff they got to check off, right? And then you have the ISPS audit. This is for security. All ships are required to be secured to a minimum standard. And in addition to that, any port facility where any one of them go is also supposed to have that level of security or the capacity to be able to meet that level of security from the international perspective of ISPS. And when you doing an ISPS audit, you are really, first of all, you have an ISPS plan that you got to read and learn. You gotta read the plan to see what all the ship's supposed to be doing from a security perspective. What type of locks they supposed to have on the doors. How often they supposed to patrol the ship. Who are the certified people. See copies of the training certificates for ISPS. These are the things you want to do for ISPS, yeah? Which area of the ship that they could go to and log themselves in if they're under an attack. Where's the purple button on board the ship? Who receives the distress alert? How all the crew know where these buttons are. It's so much about ISPS that they got to do. And they got to do all of that within 24 hours. Yeah? Because when you do an ISM audit and an ISPS audit on board a ship, usually after 3 days, they expect you to be finished. They pay you $7,500, and that's the going rate. And who makes $7,500 in 3 days? That's not a bad pay, eh? But you really got to work hard and you really got to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you could be there for a whole week and then finish that 13, 14-page item that you have to finish yet. So, ladies and gentlemen, I bored you tonight because nobody called. But you all don't like me no more. We're all in love. Anime, my God, Anime in Freeport. Anime, where you is, girl? Oh, I went to Freeport and didn't get to see Anime. I'm so saddened by that. And then they got this hurricane coming. Anime, make sure you huddle on. Make sure Laurie and them take good care of you now. So, ladies and gentlemen, we had a good time. I had a good time. I mean, it's a boring topic, but I think it's a lot to learn. Nobody seemed to be too interested because I ain't get not one call with my boy Herbie. Anyway, we can see how it go. So, we are not going to do this topic, ships inspections and survey, anymore, unless you all call me later on and tell me, boy, I really was enjoying that. I didn't know it was so much involved, because sometimes people do that. But I don't know. I ain't getting that sense tonight. So we are now closing out. So I say to you, thank you for listening. Those of you who tolerated me for the full hour and a half, thank you so much. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I say, as always, Maritime Matters out.